a research associate for the Bureau of Business Research in the College of Business, has published research, academic, and professional publications, including the Journal of Operation Management and Harvard Business Review. Prior to academia, he worked 15 years in global purchasing and logistics management at Fortune 500 companies, including Mercedes-Benz, US International, and Dish Network. Thank you, Dr. Kirschel, for being here today. We're very excited to have you to share your expertise with our audience. And from now on, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marley. I appreciate it very much. And this is great to have so many participants interested in this particular topic. Looks like there's about 20 of you on the call today. So I don't know. I've got the slides up. I'm sharing. You may be able to see my face as I talk, and so I get a little animated. And occasionally, because the camera's here and the slides are here and the Teams information's over here, if something comes up over here, like in the chat or something similar, I'd be looking this way. So anyway, just understanding that where my focus is going might change because of that. So as Molly said, this is a webinar discussion on sustainable supply chain and really supply chain management. So I am in the College of Business. I've been working and teaching in supply chain management now, and I'm trying to remember. It has been, I guess I'm approaching about 29 years of combined experience between my academic and my previous corporate experience. Now, in my corporate experience, I wasn't directly involved in sustainability. I was involved tangentially. When I got into academia, that's when I really started to spend a lot more time researching and studying and working with companies and discussing their sustainability initiatives, strategies, goals, etc. So I've published in a number of different areas, as Marley mentioned. It was in my bio. I've also done some work here in North Carolina and abroad on circular economy, sustainable supply chain management, and some other areas. We did a project with the North Carolina Environmental Equality several years ago. The lectures that I do at University of Verona are all related to sustainability. I've published and researched in it. But I bring this up because one of the things about sustainability and well, I'll back up a second. One of the things about supply chain management and sustainability separately is that both have evolved significantly and continue to evolve. So if you're those of you out there who are working supply chain management, which of course is a very, very broad discipline, very broad topic, warehousing, purchasing, transportation, operations, manufacturing, quality, and so forth. That, as you know, our jobs and the things that we're responsible for seem to change probably daily, and probably what you're doing changes daily, especially when you start considering some of the technological advances that are happening right now that we all are supposed to be embracing, but sometimes it's difficult for us to get to that point. Sustainability has also been evolving over the years, and sustainability, of course, has moved from more of an emerging topic to now it's become mainstream. But there's a lot of back and forth about, well, what is sustainability? How do we integrate it in our supply chains? How do we make it, and ultimately, how do we make it successful? If we're integrating it, how do we make it successful, and what does that mean? So we'll be going through some of that today, talking about what companies are doing, some definitions, and some other examples. And we're going to get into some discussions of technology and how it's being used. Of course, this isn't a we don't have all, hours and hours here. So we'll be touching on some things. But once I am finished, please reach out to Marley and her group, and they can get a message to me if there was something that you or your organization wants to discuss further. So hang on just a minute. I keep losing my. All right. Well, as I mentioned, this idea of sustainable supply chain management, I mean, the two areas have been around a while. They've been evolving and they've come together. This probably started to happen in the 90s, where we're seeing a lot of research articles that were coming out. There was Michael Porter, who's a professor at Harvard, wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review about sustainable supply chain management in about 1994 or 95. And he was actually looking at it from a regulation standpoint, saying that companies shouldn't fear regulation. They should use environmental regulation to help them move forward, to help them become better companies. And so the picture you see here is Paul Dittman. And Paul, I worked with Paul at the University of Tennessee. He'd probably be very happy to see his face being displayed all over everybody's screens. And so when I was in my PhD program, this was a discussion that came up in my research, and he was helping out, and he said this quote to me. He said, really, all this talk of sustainable supply chain management, right? All of the things that we talk about in terms of both environmental or all what we'll talk, and we'll get into that in just a second, environmental, social, and economic sustainability. He said it's really just boils down to best practices in supply chain management. So as we move through this discussion over the next half hour or so, I want you to keep that in mind, that the idea of sustainability and supply chain management as somebody who worked in supply chain management, who teaches it, and as somebody who researches it as well, the idea is we are trying to get to best practices in supply chain management, meaning optimization of the supply chain, cutting waste from the supply chain, saving costs, and a number of other things that go along with that. And I always like to use the example of when quality started to be an important TQM, total quality management started to be important discussion in the automotive industry. And when that first happened, all of the early gurus of quality, Deming and others, could not find an audience with the American car makers, or not a very strong audience back in the 70s when they was talking about quality. He went to Japan. He found a willing audience. In the late 70s and into the early 80s, Japanese automakers were stealing market share from the American companies, and it had to be a growing pain on the American companies to integrate quality into their supply chain systems and into their manufacturing. Sustainability is a very similar kind of thing, that companies have to accept it, and they have to work at it, and it can be best practice, and it can be beneficial to the companies, but you have to find out how it works for your company. So let's talk a little bit about the business case for sustainability, since that's really the preface of what I'm talking about. One of the biggest things, and probably what most companies have to deal with, of course, is regulation. And within the United States, that regulation over the last several months has started to change. There's still some unknowns, but we do see, we're not just working within the confines of the United States. Most companies are global, sell abroad, and there are other countries and trading blocks that demand regulation. So legislation and compliance is global. I'll come back to risk in just a second. Reputation is critical. Companies are continually going through problems with trying to make sure their reputation is strong. There was a survey done years ago by a CEO who said, the question was posed to CEOs, and it said, when you wake up, assuming CEOs wake up in the middle of the night all the time, worried about something, said, when you wake up in the middle of the night, what is the thing that you worry about the most, or what keeps you up at night? Something along those lines. And a CEO said, that somewhere in my supply chain, something is going on that I don't know about, and that I'm going to find out about it that's going to hurt our reputation. That there's a fire in a factory somewhere across the globe. There are labor issues or something else that has happened. Right. So reputation, companies want to be, they want their brand loyalty, sentiment, awareness of their brand, and for people to be happy with it. And this can go both ways, and we've seen this in activism. You've seen where companies have been punished for trying to be too sustainable. All right, you see companies that are being punished for abandoning their sustainability. So the reputation line is a difficult one to walk for a lot of companies. Um, I'll talk about risk for just a minute, and we'll get to this in a little while. Risk has sustainability and risk, the partnering of these two has been something that's talked about more recently, that companies are understanding more and more that within sustainability, they can create sustainability initiatives and strategies that actually are helping them to have better risk management and risk resilience. And I'll give you an example of that in a little while. And of course, ultimately, what companies are trying to do is increase profit. That's what unless you are maybe a nonprofit, that is your ultimate goal. You want to be not only, if you're interested in the environmental and social sustainability, none of that means anything if you can't be economically sustainable, right? So cost reduction, competitive advantage, and some of the other things that go along with that, then are really is the bottom line for most companies when they're talking about sustainability. Now, that whole idea of what is the bottom line, we'll talk about in a second, but specifically sustainability and supply chain management. Excuse me. I have a couple examples here. One is Unilever, and some of you, and I've had this come up in discussions before. Unilever right now is in a protracted disagreement with some of their brands on what their sustainability looks like. We'll talk about that a little later in the webinar. But understanding that companies, even companies dedicated to sustainability, still there are trade-offs, and still even the really good ones make mistakes or have issues. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But regardless of that, Unilever has been, excuse me, Unilever has had a significant strategy and what we call a sustainability culture or sustainability orientation for many years. They have a number of significant goals that they are still working toward, regardless of some of the challenges they might have or missteps, depending on your thoughts on it. But one of the things about a company like Unilever is that we can look at sustainability from a scope standpoint. They are enormous, right? Unilever, Apple, Toyota, these are very, very large companies, and they are able, when they make a pledge to become sustainable, they create a lot of waste, but they are in a position to manage and reduce a lot of waste as well. They can also absorb some of the challenges of sustainability, especially from a cost standpoint, because of their scope. And a couple examples of what Unilever is doing. They have supplier collaboration basically related to sustainable sourcing, and this goes all across raw materials, process, manufacturing, a lot of different areas. And they have a vast supply base, tens of thousands of suppliers. And just one example, they have reduced the amount of plastic within their supply chain, working with their suppliers by 23% since a baseline was established in 2019. They have goals to be like 80% reduction in 2035 and eventually go to completely recycled packaging, and all their packaging will be recycled. Just some of the goals they're working toward. From a logistics standpoint, they've done a lot of interesting things with low emissions transportation, optimizing their distribution, and really working to keep the cost and the emissions and resource usage and waste down in their last mile delivery, working with third-party logistics companies. And what they self-reported is, since a baseline they created in 2010, they've been able to reduce carbon emissions by 43%. Now, there were some other examples from Unilever, number of other examples of other companies that are doing a lot of the same things, trying to find transportation that is more sustainable, that less using less fossil fuel. But all of this has been a challenge because of the what is typically used for transportation in some of these other areas. So let's go to a not the opposite end of the spectrum, because it's a similar business, but from a scope, from a size standpoint, the other end of the spectrum, Dr. Bronner's. You've probably seen Dr. Bronner's in the store. There's a little, that was a bottle. That was the best picture I could find that would fit in the space. But one of the unique things about Dr. Bronner's is if you look at their bottles, they have all kinds of sayings on the sides. And the original Dr. Bronner, who founded the company, a very eccentric guy, and his family still runs it. Well, Dr. Bronner's looks at sustainability. They are mission bound. So Unilever, I would say, is scope. They have an orientation, but Dr. Bronner's is mission. Smaller company, privately held, and they're the ones who have been able to use risk management, supplier collaboration on responsible sourcing, very similar to Unilever. But what they've been able to do is create significant loyalty with all their suppliers. They have a 100% supplier commitment that are loyal to them over the past 6 or 7 years. And what they've been able to do from our research is to find suppliers, work with them. They help the suppliers scale up to what Dr. Bronner's needs, and then they help support the suppliers even through good and bad times. So during COVID, there were a lot of suppliers that Dr. Bronner's used in India that were going to go out of business, and Dr. Bronner's sent their managers there to work with them, find other uses for the product, and actually threw them a live financial lifeline to get them through that. And now they have even better supplier collaboration with them. That's from a social sustainability. One of the things about Dr. Bronner's is they also look very closely at their economic performance. So they're not just, they are a very sustainable company, but they look at sustainability also from an economic standpoint and balance it. And they've had significant growth in their product demand over the past 5 years. So different companies, different initiatives, different strategies, but they blend together to make them both successful companies within their realms of sustainability. All right, so let's kind of back up just a little bit and talk about what sustainable supply chain management is. So it's really cooperative management of supply chain partners, right? And it's a strategic focus on what I've already referred to as this triple bottom line. And it has to be based on the management, and the strategic focus have to be based on stakeholder requirements and the perceptions of their suppliers, their customers, shareholders, because without those requirements and perceptions integrated into any of strategic focus of sustainable supply chain management, really like any initiative in your supply chain, without those requirements and perceptions, you're going to have a hard time. So the three dimensions, we'll start with social, fair labor practices, your community support, healthcare, and also supplier selection and monitoring of those same principles or initiatives that are within the company. There's the economic, which of course is the most popular and the most salient of the three dimensions of the triple bottom line: your return on assets, efficiency and effectiveness within your supply chain, making sure you're cutting costs, and also making sure your customer's happy. viability, innovation, and then a supply chain orientation of making sure that the company understands the importance of supply chain management on the bottom line of the firm. And finally, our environmental, the reduction of energy, waste, supplier selection monitoring. These are just some examples. Our 4 R's of reuse, recycle, remanufacture, and I've forgotten the third one, the fourth one. I apologize. But these are the 3 pillars. And so the idea behind this is how do companies that are working towards sustainable initiatives want to be sustainable? How do they manage these 3 areas? How do they balance these 3 areas together? Because all of them have a performance outcome or an outcome that's related to cost and also to revenue generation. And if we go back to what I was talking, the slide that I showed earlier, where my former colleague, Dr. Dittman, had said it's really just good supply chain management. Well, that's what this is. This is the good supply chain management looks at the social issues. The good supply chain management looks at environmental issues. And of course, good supply chain management looks at economic issues and all of them from a performance standpoint, because each one of these, if the company has initiatives and a strategy, it helps to optimize the supply chain overall. Right. And so somebody might say, well, why supply chain management and sustainability? What is it about these 2 areas that should be combined? Why are we even talking about this? All right. Why did Marley invite me to come and discuss this? Well, really because supply chain management and the operations and supply chain touch really almost every aspect of the firm. And therefore, when you look at working really anything within the company in terms of optimization, improving performance, supply chain management touches so many areas that becomes a focal point, a focal discipline throughout the whole organization. Of course, this relates to sustainability goals. So here's a chart that you can see that I think is interesting. That when you look at the environmental impact associated with consumer sector, it is within the supply chain. You can see the supply chain impact of source, natural capital source, all of the things that are going to affect air, soil, land, resource consumption, waste, right? And you can see food and beverage or personal household goods, retail, all these different areas that the supply chain makes up an enormous part of the impact, those natural impacts. Now, there are some that would argue differently on this because you have products that, like a car, that has impact long after it leaves the manufacturing facility, which I understand. But overall, this is how a lot of research looks at where the impact is. So consumers, our little piece in this says, okay, how we consume is going to have some impact on the natural environment. All right. But really, because of our choices in consumption and the supply chains that we support, that's where this is showing that impact from. All right. So that is why sustainability and supply chain has been such an important area and a real focus when a lot of companies are looking at these strategies. Well, I talked about the 3 pillars of sustainability and supply chain management. But what I'd like to do is deep dive a little bit more into the green or the environmental aspect of it. And this will also bring us back into the economic sustainability, the economic dimension, we call it. And there will also be some aspects of the social dimension, but we'll focus mostly on the environmental dimension. Green supply chain management or environmental supply chain management is made up of 3 fairly broad areas of eco-design, our supply chain partnering, and then environmental management. And I'll look at these individually. And let's start with eco design. This is the design of the product, but also the processes with environmental objectives and the impact in mind. Companies, oftentimes, when they're looking at sustainability within their organizations, they will look at what is the product design, what is the packaging design, what are the processes that go along with that, how do we create something within our system, within our supply chain that can then reduce waste. It can reduce hazardous materials that are being used in the products. It can reduce the overall resources that go into the product. It can also be part of looking at how organizations understand the life cycle of the product. So after it's been used, where does it go? What are the possibilities of post-consumer consumption? Just a few examples here. Companies are starting to move away from the plastic six-pack containers that hold your favorite six-pack together, and they're moving to. There's a number of different areas that they're moving to. This one you see on your screen is more of a paper-based, a sturdy paper base rather than the plastic. There are others. There are some companies that have actually used a product that is edible for animals. So once you're done with your six pack or whatever it is that you enjoy, that particular six pack holder can be tossed. This is the claim, can be tossed into the ocean, and then there was a picture of a turtle, and that was an older slide, and I should have kept it. Picture of a turtle eating, right, this biodegradable, edible six-pack holder. All right, a really fairly benign and not probably a very well-known aspect of eco design that companies are moving toward. A lot of you are, I'm sure, familiar with Patagonia. Patagonia is one of the pillars of sustainability, sustainable business, and some of the things that Patagonia has done is really pushed product design, process design forward. You can see that some of their products are used 100% recycled materials. They actually have or used to have, and I haven't seen it in a while, but they used to have a marketing campaign that said, it showed a jacket like this, and it said, "Do not buy this jacket." The idea is continue to use the jackets that you have, hopefully they're Patagonia, until they're really worn out, all right, and then buy the jacket. That was the whole point of it. Toyota has also been a company that has looked at the design of products and processes for many, many years. One of the interesting things about Toyota is they've actually been able to achieve zero emission plants. They have worked to change their processes, products to some extent, but certainly the processes for building cars and some of their offerings. Now, you might think about automobiles, and in fact, I read an interesting op-ed several years ago about if the automobile was invented today, it would probably never make it to the market because automobiles are so pollution intensive as a product themselves. All right, even some of the electric vehicles we're seeing or the hybrids, there are challenges with how they're built. There are challenges with the batteries and so forth. And so your combustion engines and even some of the EVs have this impact that may not be salient today. But of course, we can't live without our cars, and Toyota's working on a number of areas. There was a great story about how they had an engineer of one of their product lines in Canada who had figured out how to change the way that when automobiles are painted, they have to go through an electrostatic coating that helps the paint adhere to it, and then it goes through several clear coats. And when it goes through all of these different baths, it's a significant amount of wastewater that's generated, and that's not very good wastewater that you would want to drink. Has to be treated, and they had engineers cut that wastewater consumption, the wastewater use in that particular vehicle paint process by 50%. Right? Mercedes-Benz has done similar things. So there's a lot of stuff that companies are doing that way. And Another example, Simple Green, we use this in our house, moving away from the harsher chemicals and finding actually, and this is a real important part of any kind of sustainability, especially when it comes to products and processes, that the quality and the functionality of that product remain very high. Surveys have been done that show some consumers, significant number of consumers, worry about the quality of the project when environmental sustainability initiatives, processes, product, the ingredients or parts that are added into it. So companies have to also market that these are good products and that there's no quality change or degradation because of maybe a change in the process or what goes into the product itself. A second dimension of the environmental supply chain management is supply chain partnering. So collaborating with your partners to execute environmental objectives. One thing that's critical uh, about any initiative in supply chain management is that it has to involve the supply chain partners. That's your upstream and downstream customers, or starting with your raw material suppliers all the way to the customers, and then anything in your reverse logistics. Companies often, when they look at sustainability initiatives, will think, well, what are we going to do as a company? In other words, what are we going to do within the four walls of the company, which is critical, and that's actually our third part of environmental supply chain management we'll talk about in a second. But companies have, in order for any initiative, whether it's in sustainability, quality, optimization, efficiency, effectiveness, has to be shared by their supply chain partners, or it's very likely that it's not going to be successful. And a couple examples here. There was a great example in a case study of how Boise Cascade, working with OfficeMax, were able to move about a third of the transport of paper products from Boise Cascade pulp mills and manufacturing to OfficeMax on rail rather than using truck. If you move to rail, there's significant sustainability advantages to that. And so they were able to get trucks off the road using rail, but it took that supply chain partner in order to make it happen because without that, the company, if you don't talk to your customer as a supplier, when you're trying to initiate these sustainability advantages, OfficeMax said, well, we want daily delivery. So Boise Cascade said, well, if we ship it by train, we have to fill the box cars. It's going to be a little bit longer, right? So they worked out an agreement that they would have product that arrived at OfficeMax maybe every third day rather than every day as had been in the past. And that way they were able to utilize. So really, honestly, fairly simple ideas in not simple in execution, but simple in design through collaboration, then it helps to make the company more sustainable. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see returnable packaging, a project we're working with Caterpillar right now in looking at sustainability and how returnable packaging can be significant through supply chain partnering collaboration to reduce the amount of packaging, the environmental impact of packaging significantly. Our final part of environmental supply chain management is the environmental management itself. So this is what happens inside the firm. And this is critical because companies have to have a culture, or sometimes we call it an orientation, where you have the support from management, you have the cross-functional cooperation of all the departments, and then maybe some aspect of total quality environmental management. This is the Toyota Environmental Challenge that they've had going for a long time. They hope to achieve these by 2050, and everything from emissions in their products and their processes to minimizing what they're using from a waste standpoint, recycling systems, and some of their community outreach. But all of these have to come from inside the company and then radiate throughout the supply chain, but they have to be supported internally first. So I'm kind of talking out two sides of my mouth here, that one, the company itself has to be what we call the sustainability oriented, but they also have to understand that they need to be supply chain oriented and make sure that their supply chain partners are on board or cooperating with them. Otherwise, you can look at all of the things on this slide right here. All of these different areas would be very difficult without your stakeholders, supply chain partners involved as well. Mercedes-Benz has also been very involved in this. And I'll talk about this in a minute about some of the trade-offs. So Mercedes was an interesting company. When I worked there, they were working on creating carbon neutral fleet. They were working on all kinds of initiatives that were going to reduce their carbon footprint, that were going to reduce their waste, that were going to reduce the environmental impact of the vehicles and the manufacturing process related to it. At the same time, the Mercedes-Benz lawyers were lobbying in Washington, and this would have been in about 1999 with some of the CAF laws that were working to regulate automobile manufacturers to increase their mileage per gallon of gas. So you can see how even Mercedes, working on their own, trying to create a more sustainable company, at the same time lobbying for regulation not to make them do that. Companies have to do what they have to do in order to remain viable, all right? And there's going to always be trade-offs in those different areas. As a kind of a summary from how to improve supply chain sustainability, I found this, and I like it, looking at where are your pain points in the supply chain, because if you can map them, you are able to reduce the waste and the bottlenecks. You're optimizing your transportation, collaboration, as we mentioned, minimizing inventory, reusing your waste, looking at reverse logistics, the environmentally friendly packaging materials, and then I like this last one, nudging your consumers to be more interested in pushing this. And you can guarantee that used to be that push regulators to regulation was what motivated companies. And really today it's the consumer. If the power of the consumer said, we will not buy, and you've seen this before, and we even talked about it at the beginning of the webinar, if the consumer says we will or we won't buy certain things, that will change a company significantly. I'll mention quickly the idea of technology in sustainability today. There's a really, really cool things going on with AI, and this is just one example that AI is being used for recycling. This is not within the companies, it's really a municipal level, but it gives you an example that AI can quickly scan all of the recycled material. So a lot of recycling now is all mixed rather than being separated as it used to be. And AI can go in and automatically say this can be recycled, this can't, and you have robots that move it off of the system, which makes recycling significantly more efficient. I'll finish this up. We're running out of time here, but I'll finish it up to talk about some of the challenges. I brought these up before, and you'll see this chart again that I used earlier, how the environmental impact is embedded in your supply chains. Well, that's a good and a bad thing. The good thing is that's where companies can spend most of their efforts in looking at that, just as a company would want to look at where their highest costs are to reduce costs. The challenging thing is the stakeholder buy-in. Oftentimes, we don't know what's going on in our supply chains. We don't really have the control. And how do we get the message to both our consumers and our suppliers that this is what we want to do? And we might be able to do that within we call the locus of control, but how do we get our supplier's supplier, all right, on board with some of these initiatives? How do we convince our customer that these things are important and maybe it costs a little bit more? The other big challenge is the benefits. Sustainability requires certain trade-offs. It can be expensive. Sometimes long-term benefits really aren't very clear. to companies. And so that's another challenge that companies have to find those, and they're there, but they have to find them. This is a great quote from a paper that I did several years ago with a manager. We were discussing sustainability in their supply chain, and he says, we worry about not being able to do it, and if we could stay competitive. Big risk involved. We fear losing standing in our market because of these initiatives. So it is a fear of not really knowing what you're doing, getting into it and finding out that what you've done isn't really working, losing market share, some of these other areas. All right. One of the other things that challenges how do you make products and processes sustainable? I've given you some great examples, but in the end, it's still very, very difficult. Companies have a hard road ahead of them to try to figure out how is it to make their organization sustainable, how to make their supply chain sustainable, and make that partnering with their external stakeholders up and down the supply chain, get them on board. So I will end it by saying, in summary, sustainable supply chain management is important. It can help companies. It can help the bottom line, but it's challenging. It has definitely requires a stakeholder buy-in and cooperations. A lot of companies are still working on this. Companies have been working on this for a long time. It ebbs and flows, but I say ultimately the progress continues to be made in this area. With that, Marley, I think I am going to finish up in case there are some questions at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Kirchhoff. This was an excellent presentation. Now we're going to have time for questions from the audience. Does anybody have a question for Dr. Kirchhoff? If so, please feel free to use the chat, or if you like to use the mic, please let me know. You can send a quick comment on the chat and I will unmute your microphone. You can also raise your hand and I will be able to unmute you that way. Let's check the chat. So
maybe while you're thinking about any comments or questions, when I present this information, I get sort of dichotomous reactions to it. One will be managers or public policy representatives who will say, "This is great. You're saying all the right things. I agree. More companies need to hear this." And I'll also get a more dichotomous response of companies that will say, similar to that quote that I showed you, that will say, "Yeah, this sounds great, but I just don't understand how we can implement this in our company. I don't even know where to start." And I've done a lot of interviews with companies over the years, and I hear that often. And so I that's a challenge.
I'm gonna ask one more time. Does anybody have a question for Dr. Kirchhoff? We're gonna send these slides after the session. So please be in the lookout for this in your emails. We will also try to send, if not today, sometime this week, a feedback survey. Feel free to fill that out. We would love to hear your comments on what you feel like has been your experience with our webinars, and if you have any specific topic that you would like us to cover in our future webinars as well. There's a comment in the chat. It says, "Thank you. Thanks all. A well done presentation by Alan." Thank you so much, Alan.
Thank you.
We do appreciate those as well.
Yeah.
There's another question.
Yep.
Sorry, Dr. Kirchhoff.
No. I was just about to say the same thing. Go ahead, Marley.
Okay. Gillian Griffin says, "Do you have any suggestions for working with smaller companies?"
I do, and if you ever wanted, if you would like to reach out to me, I'd be happy to discuss some of that with you. We actually have on our advisory board a company, a small company, and the president of the company has been able to put some sustainability initiatives in some of their processes and their products, and he's a wealth of knowledge. So, Gillian, if you wanted to reach out to me, I'm just going to put my email. You can look me up
in the comments.
in the comments.
Okay.
Please send me an email. I'd be happy to discuss that further with you. Certainly, smaller companies have more of a challenge because, yeah, you don't have the leverage, as you say, with clients. You might not have the same kind of resources, but there are a lot of things that you can still do. Would love to discuss it. So, yeah, absolutely. So please, any of you, Gillian, or any of you, please feel free to reach out. Would love to talk to you some more.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Kirchhoff. Does anybody else have a question? We still have 10 minutes before we wrap up the session. I see another question by Pablo. It says, given the manufacturing diversity in North Carolina, what sectors do you see as having the most opportunity for rapid progress in sustainable supply chain management?
Let me think about that for a minute because there's initiatives in so many different areas. Of course, North Carolina has traditionally been an agricultural, has a pretty strong agricultural base, and it's not just in agriculture, but also in fisheries. And uh, I think I think that there is a lot of opportunity within agriculture and natural resources for sustainability. And a lot of this comes from some of the technology that's going on. I'll give you an example. And this is, Pablo, by no means a complete answer because we could talk about some of the manufacturing that's going on in some other areas. But if you focus on agriculture just for a minute, I'm actually trying to work on a grant with one of your colleagues. Um, Nick Herden on AI in agriculture. There's some really cool applications with drones and AI that can scan farmland, it can scan cropland, look at and take soil samples, look at how the product is growing, and figure out where water needs to be reduced, where water needs to be increased, where fertilizers or pesticides are being overused, and then to be able to correct, work with the farmer to correct those. That is a significant step towards sustainability because if you can reduce water or create systems where you're watering smarter, you are fertilizing smarter and using pesticides smarter, all of those have significant environmental ramifications because all of them get into the food supply and agriculture, as you may know, is one and production manufacturing, but agriculture is one of the largest users of water for any state.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kirchhoff. I don't see any questions left in the chat, but as you heard, Dr. Kirchhoff is more than welcome to receive your emails. So please feel free to reach out to him for any questions that you might have later related to this topic. Please also feel free to reach out to the center. We can also, if we don't have an answer, we will certainly help you to point you in the right direction and connect you with somebody else that is knowledgeable. So Dr. Kirchhoff, you will be kind so to share the next slide for us.
There you
go. This is usually what we share just for you to be informed about our next webinar. This time I will be presenting on May 29, and this topic will be about the role of forest products in decarbonizing the built environment. If any of you are interested in this topic related to forest products or wood science, please feel free to join us next month on this session. And next slide, please. And also, for those that are here in North Carolina, we would like to extend you an invitation for our upcoming workshop. This time we're going to Sanford area, and we're going to be at the Dennis Wicker Civic Center. This is going to be on June 3rd. This is a free event. So for those that are interested in learning more about pollution prevention and sustainability in manufacturing settings, please join us. We will be sending invitations for this as well to your emails, and we're taking registrations right now. And actually, Dr. Kirchhoff is going to be there as well presenting sustainable supply management, and we will have other presenters related to these topics.
Oops,
Thank
sorry.
you very much. Yep, that's fine. Please feel free to join us in our upcoming events for this month and next month, and also follow us on our social media to stay current on our events. We are pretty active on LinkedIn and also have Instagram account and our website. Thank you very much, and I hope you all of you have a great rest of the day. Great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.